My name's Sarah, this is Abby, and welcome to Azul Unlimited. I'm a scuba instructor and I owned a dive shop in Indonesia until global shutdowns changed the trajectory of my career. I moved into my van out of necessity, but now it's my tool for traveling, teaching, and guiding dive expeditions worldwide. Abby and I are sweating in here, but I just want to tell you that I have dive expeditions coming up. I have Baja in December. I have a special LGBTQIA plus Baja dive expedition happening in January. And then I have my shark conservation and research expedition in collaboration with Fins Attached in SOCORRO. That's happening in April. So if you're interested in any of those trips, you can check out the details on my website. I would love to have you join. Spots are filling up and I am so eternally grateful for this community. Let's get into the video. That's the sign for strong current. It's really hot in here, so we're gonna get right into it. Getting confident for diving in strong currents or really surgy water just takes like getting in and experiencing it. However, there are a lot of things you can do to prepare yourself so that your dives are the safest and the funnest that they could be. First, we're gonna talk about types of diving in strong currents. We have the standard drift dive. That's where you go on a boat, you drop down, you explore a dive site going with the current, and then you come up in a different location and the boat picks you up. You can also do this from the shore if you're doing like a river dive. Walk in from shore, do the dive, and then get out. But it's a little bit more complicated because you have to have an exit strategy. Somebody picking you up at the different location, or you could have left one car at the beginning and end of the dive. So that's your standard drift dive. Then you have the kind of diving that I've talked about a lot on this channel, and that's diving in the split, something you do at a pinnacle dive site. You have the pinnacle, right? The current is going this way. So you drop out here in the side where the current is, and you swim down to find the split. And the split is where the current hits and splits around the rock. In that spot, there should be a little dead zone where you're not actually feeling the full force of the current. You hang out there, and then once you're ready to go, you go around the rock with the current, and then you have to swim across the current to get to the protected side of the reef, which will be over here. Okay, and from that spot, you can come up and the boat can pick you up. Those are the main two that I am familiar with. You can let me know if there's more, but the majority of people, when talking about diving in current, they're gonna be talking about drift diving. So now let's talk about how you prepare for this type of diving. So before you even get in the water with strong current, what do you need to do? Get in shape. I've talked about this before on the channel, and I talk about it in person all the time because I think it's the #1 thing for safety as a diver. You don't need to go crazy on it, but doing cardio, doing some strength training is really helpful. Being fit will give you the power and endurance to swim against a strong current, and it has the added benefit of helping you with your air consumption. Fitness, nutrition, hydration, all of those things are also helpful for reducing your risk for DCS. Next comes your mind. Regular meditation and even some breath work would be great because those two things allow you to stay calm in challenging environments. Meditation really teaches you to like breathe deeply, be aware of your surroundings, and make super grounded decisions. It gives you the capability of like, even when it's a little bit chaotic, of like seeing the full picture, right? Of like stepping outside of your body and going like, what is happening here? It gives you that ability to pause before taking action, which is so important in rescues and emergencies. Be familiar with your equipment. If you're nervous about going on your first dive in a strong current, take your own gear. It's gonna make you more comfortable breathing from your regulator and knowing your BCD and fins. If you can't use your own equipment, you haven't traveled with it, at least take the time on the boat or on the way to the dive site, getting to know your equipment, how everything works, and specifically where are the dump valves on your BCD, because those are really helpful in strong currents. During your normal dives, preparing for a trip to a place with strong current, work on your buoyancy. You need to be able to hover in any position really comfortably. Practice, practice, practice. I have a video talking about buoyancy. It might be helpful for you. I'll link it in the description below. Plan your dive. Drift diving and diving in the split requires good knowledge of tides, wind, and waves. Slack tide is where you're gonna get no current. That's where you've gone from rising to falling tide, right? That little hump at the top can also be the opposite, right? Going from falling to rising, that little drop at the end, that's slack low tide, right? We have slack high tide and slack low tide. When you look at a chart, it's going to be little squigglies. This is the technical term. If the squiggly is just going up and down, right, there's just a small exchange, then the current is not going to be very strong. If you have an exchange that goes from way up here to way down here, that is going to be a strong current if you catch it in the middle of that falling or rising tide. Again, the slack is usually predictable. There's not going to be current, or maybe a little bit if it's like the very tail end or the beginning. But if you catch it right in the middle, it's going to be really strong. And something to watch out for, usually around full moon and new moon, are really big exchanges, so strong currents. That can be helpful in kind of preparing yourself to do a dive. You can start with maybe just a little current. That could be your introduction to drift diving, versus like going crazy and hitting the cauldron like in my last video at full falling tide where it's just like blowing past you. When you are gonna do that dive in strong currents, I recommend going with a knowledgeable buddy. This doesn't mean that you're doing a trust me dive, right? You're not just following that buddy or that instructor, that dive master. You are involved in the planning and execution of the dive, but you're going with someone who knows what to expect and they can support you in your first experience. That's one of the reasons why group travel is so great. During my Komodo dive expedition, we had some experienced divers who were used to currents and some that had never gone into a strong current at all. We got to work together and teach each other so that we had fun and everybody learned. Then right before the dive, you should do a current check. One person needs to put on fins, mask, and snorkel. They jump in. What you're looking for is water movement. So you'll see that with soft coral, with kelp. Kelp is great to understand how fast the current is going. You can also take notes of how the fish are moving. So if you see a fish trying to go upstream and it's working really, really hard, then you can assume that it's a bit stronger. We have some tools that are useful for diving in strong currents. One is a reef hook. I am not a fan of reef hooks. I actually don't own one, but they exist to help people and I want you to know about them. It's basically a hook, right? It can be one prong, or I've seen like 3-pronged, and it'll have a line attached to it and then a bolt snap at the end. So you take the reef hook, hook it onto a rock without any like life on it, hopefully, and then you can hold on to the line itself, or you can clip the line to your BCD. I prefer just holding because I don't like clipping myself to anything. That just is a me thing. I prefer just to kick a little bit against the current. If it's really, really strong, then I will hold on just with a finger or two. There are arguments, right, from both sides. One, I have oils on my hands that might not be good for the reef, but I have seen people without a lot of discernment just sort of throw reef hooks on whatever they can find. If you're actually having to put your hand on something, you're gonna look a little bit more closely to make sure that there's no animals or things living there. I've also seen that reef hooks, it's a lot of pressure on really small points, and I've seen them break reefs like way too many times, so many times. And I've never broken a reef by holding on with a finger or two. So again, that's just my preference. You do you. Next is fins. Never, ever, ever use split fins when you're dealing with strong currents or strong surge. There's a lot of jokes out there about how split fins are terrible and blah, blah, blah. I'm not gonna say that. Split fins are a tool that work for certain people under certain conditions. These are not the conditions. You will not have enough power with split fins. You need a good blade fin. Some people even choose to wear freediving fins in strong currents. I don't like it. I don't want to use freediving fins for that purpose, but they use them. Okay, you want something that's solid. SMB. You should always, always, always have an SMB when diving in a strong current. This one from Dan is super nice because it's big. If you're going to be anywhere where there is a possibility of you getting far away from the boat, or if there are a lot of waves, like tall waves, you want something that is big. On top of that, let's get this all the way over here, I like to carry a mirror. So I'm shining it at you, but it's just not very bright in here. And then a little whistle. So an audible signaling device. Next up, and this is optional, it's a PLB, which is a personal locator beacon, or a satellite communicator, and either of those in a dive housing. If you dive in really remote places where there is a possibility of you surfacing with no one in sight, you want to have one of those so that you can send out an SOS. Now we're going to get into team diving. The first thing is communication. How are you going to communicate so that you can actually stay together and have a fun dive? My recommendation is that you stay within sight of one another. And that sounds silly and obvious, but a lot of times, like when diving in a split, you get into positions where you're swimming down together, kind of fanned out. One person is in front and somebody's over here kind of behind, and then another person's over here kind of behind. And if that front person never turns around, then you have a problem because you're not going to hear the tank banging. I've had this happen before. So if you are in a position like that, you need to be turning back and just checking, like, is everybody okay? Are we good? Like, is our whole team together? Also, discuss how you want to communicate with one hand, how much air you have. And there are several ways of doing that. If you're in PSI, maybe you're just gonna flash numbers. So if you have 1700, you could go 5, 10, 15, 17. Those of you who are into cave diving and tech diving, you probably know we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You can use whatever signals you want, but they need to be discussed beforehand so that everybody understands each other. Oh my gosh, my camera keeps overheating, so I'm gonna leave the door open. Hopefully it's not too loud. It's warm. Now, staying together as a team. If you notice that you're going faster than your guide or your buddy, you are probably higher in the water column. That brings us to your position in the water as a diver. When possible, stay low to the bottom or close to the reef, obviously without touching the reef. My personal favorite position, I like turning my body 90 degrees, going along with the current that way, facing the reef. Okay, that way my fins are far away from the reef. Depending on the topography, you could face the other way so that you're looking out into the blue if that's the type of dive that you're trying to do. But you want to watch out for your fins. So in reference to my example, if you're drifting much faster than everybody else, besides your position in the water, you can also hide behind things on the reef. So like a big rock, big coral bommy, you can get right behind that, hide from the current, wait for your group to catch up with you, and then continue along and adjust your position so that you're actually going at the same rate. Now we're going to talk about safety. Be honest with your dive team. If you're not feeling prepared for a dive in a strong current, say something. If you're overly stressed or having difficulty underwater, just cancel the dive. You can cancel the dive at any point, before, during, not after because it's done. But you get what I mean. We all need to feel empowered to be able to cancel a dive whenever we need to. Separations. The standard 1-minute rule for buddy separations gets adjusted when diving in strong currents. If you find yourself still on the reef and you've just separated from your group for a bit, if you were going too fast, you can hide behind something and see if they come because they're floating toward you. If they got away from you, then you swim with the current to try to catch up with them. And you only do that for about 20 seconds. Could be more or less depending on the strength of the current. So you don't do it for the full minute. We can just get too far away from each other on drift dives. After that amount of time, if you don't see bubbles or fins or anything that resembles a diver, then you slowly go up to the surface, right? And we're planning our dives so that we can go up to the surface without a safety stop. We want to be conservative when we're dive planning, especially when diving in strong currents. Now, if you're in a strong current and you get blown off the reef and you're by yourself in the blue, don't waste time. Like, you're not going to find anybody out there. So just pay attention to your computer, start to go up. If for whatever reason you've lost your computer, then just follow like the teeniest bubbles that are going up to the surface with you. Stay under them. Once you get to the surface, make yourself positively buoyant and comfortable. Make yourself visible. So get your SMB inflated, and you can use that to help signal somebody, right? If you place it like this, you hold it, I'm out of frame, but if you're like this, this is like a really big okay for people. If you have your SMB, oh my God, this thing is so huge. I'm gonna deflate it a little bit so I can work with it. Okay, so if it's straight up and you're just going like this, that's an emergency. When you're at the surface, you want to communicate if you're okay or if you're hurt. The other ways we communicate those, right? We have the big okay, we have this kind of okay, and then if we're not okay, waving the arms. If you surface and your dive team is nowhere nearby and you don't see your boat, but there are other boats nearby, you can have the other boat hail yours. That's why it's good to know the name of the vessel that you're diving from. Know the boat name. You can even get on that other boat and they can deliver you to your dive boat. We're still talking about safety. If the current is really wild and you're struggling just to like deal with yourself, you may not be able to get an SMB out. Also, you might think about whether or not you're going to be able to control an SMB at the surface, because sometimes you send them up and if the wind or the current is super strong, it's going to be a sail and it'll just take you away. What I do, I grab my octopus and I just blow tons and tons of bubbles. That lets a boat know that there's something going on here. There are divers here. And then I'll surface within that bubble formation that I created. Ultimately, to learn to dive in strong currents, you have to get in the water, experience the sensations, and learn how you respond to challenges. Sign up for a guided dive with someone experienced or a group trip. Challenging yourself in this way will make you a stronger diver. All right. Now I want to hear from you. Let's share our wildest current surge stories in the comments. I want to know what happened and how did you deal with it? How did you feel about it? You guys share a lot of knowledge in the comments on these videos, so let's just keep learning together. As always, I have expeditions coming up, so you can check out the details on my website, or you can join Patreon to get more from the Azul Unlimited community. My camera is about to overheat. Okay, let me bite. Oh my God, I can't believe I just did that. So I'm using an actual microphone and I cannot tell you guys the amount of times I have started recording and I didn't turn on the little unit at the top of the camera. And so I get either totally muffled sound or no sound at all. And I just did that. I spoke to my camera for the last 10 minutes. It got some sound, but it sounds terrible. So it's fine. I'm at a park. I tried to find, I need to shut this off. I tried to find somewhere quiet to do this video and we'll see how it goes. I need to close the door, but it's really, really hot. We're gonna survive. It's gonna be fine. Emotional support, SMB, stay there. This is just a forever balance of things falling over. So I'm in the Puget Sound area. I drove up from California to Washington, mostly along Highway 1. I'm gonna be here for the summer, possibly even longer, because I'm currently shopping for a sailboat. I just learned how to sail, like very basic, and I fell in love. And I've had it in my brain that I want to get a small sailboat that I can put a compressor in and just sail around and dive everywhere and share it with you guys and teach from the boat, because I am ready to be on the water. And unfortunately, in the United States, it is really hard for me to be by the water in the van. Like, people do not like me. I get kicked out of places all the time, or it's always paid parking or whatever. And I can't sleep there. Ever. If you want to know more about like where I am and what's going on, I share a little bit on Instagram, especially stories. But the majority of like the more personal stuff of what's happening right now is in Patreon. And that's mostly because I like my little group that I feel safe with. I am sharing the boat buying process with them and asking their opinions on things, and we're all learning from each other, and it's just like really, really fun. If any of that stuff sounds interesting to you, then you can check them out. Instagram is totally free. Actually, I have a free tier on Patreon as well, so some of my posts go to the free tier. So you can connect with me in that way. Otherwise, I'm always going to be here on YouTube. So, whee. Dan, stay put. There's somebody like literally right outside my window. I keep overheating. This is take 20.